Welcome, guys. TJJ was asking me about making an arrow, and I happened to push the insert right into this guy today, so I need an arrow. And last Sunday I was out in the woods and shooting in the bog and popped one over a deer, and of course I heard splog. That was it. Never saw a trace of that arrow. If you paint your arrows white, it's very difficult to lose an arrow. You really have to bury it in the bog, but it can happen. So today we're going to make an arrow. The arrow is going to be a 600 spined warrior. It's going to be full length. We're going to put a 200 grain tip on it, glue in the insert. I like long feathers, so we're going to be making up some 6.5 inch parabolic feathers to put on it. And let's get started. Okay. Okay, guys, so first of all we're going to take a feather. We're going to cut our feather. I just use a chisel to do it. I don't have one of those fancy little rollers. It's very simple. You don't need anything fancy. You could build a Viking ship with a chisel. Anyhow, I like big feathers. This is a 6.5 inch long parabolic feather. 6.5 inches. I got it at 3 Rivers Archery. You see that I've taped on some tape here? If you don't do that, the feather goes all over the place, or it's hard to do. So I put on a little bit of Scotch tape, and then all I have to do is take my feather, insert it into the little slot that's in the jig, put my little bit of tape down on top of it, and that will hold it in place. Okay, and then I just sort of lay it down so I can push it on, and I do it this way. And now I just make sure that I can feel it's all in the slot, and all I do is I nibble away at it with the chisel. So I just take a small cut, maybe a 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, that's all, and it will just snap, and then you just move it over about a 1/4 inch, not very far. That way it makes a nice round line, and just keep pushing it out of the way. Six and a half inch long feathers really correct this arrow of mine quite well, so I like these bigger feathers. The idea, of course, is most people want little tiny feathers. Then I just clean it up, you know. They think that the little tiny feather, less resistance, it's faster and all this. And I suppose theoretically that's so, but basically the big feather works much better in my opinion. So when I do that, now I can take out my feather and we're ready to get started. So all I have to do is cut a few more of these, and we'll be into the next step. Okay, be back in a minute. Okay, guys, so one of the next steps is to put the insert in. When I do that, I basically take my insert and I take a little bit of wax. You can use hot glue. Some people use Loctite. Wax is good enough, especially in the winter time when it's stiff. And you just put some on the end of the thread. And then a little trick is if you turn the point backwards, you'll feel it click. And when it clicks, it will just screw right in, really easy. I'm not going to screw it in very far. I'm just going to put it in a little bit, and I'm going to use it as a handle. Now, you can use epoxy, which works really great. And 5-minute epoxy doesn't take that long, but you have to mix the two together. You can use hot wax, which or hot glue, which you simply heat up and spread on. It's good. It lets you change things quickly, but in all honesty, I lose more points using this. Okay, so it's handy for versatility, but can be a problem. Here I have a little bit of a glue, just called insert glue, which I got at Three Rivers. It's pretty expensive, but what I do is well, first of all, you've got to clean the tube. Okay, so this tube has been cut. There's a little bit of dust in there. Now, I don't have any alcohol, so I've got my Old Spice. So I'm just going to put a little bit of Old Spice in. I have great smelling arrows, by the way. And if you swab this out, you'll see that it starts to turn black. That's the dust in the powder. And if you don't get that out of there, the glue will not adhere to the walls, and out will come your glue, or out will come your point, because that moved. Anyhow, so now it's nice and clean. Okay, at this point now we'll take our Q-tip, and I'm just going to take a little bit of this glue and spread here, and once this glue adheres to something, it dries very quickly. Okay, so it's wet right now like this, but as soon as I push it in, it's got to really go in there quick, because see, it's already solid. Once the two pieces go together, wango tango. Now I got my wax on there, and all I have to do is tighten that up. And we've got a 200 grain point on there, and it's on there like a rock. Okay, so that's the next step, and now we'll start getting into our feathers. Okay, I'll be back in a minute. Okay, now guys, the next step is for us to put on our feathers. So I have a little jig here. You preset your jig. It has a couple of knobs here so that I can adjust it, and once you set it up for an arrow, you never have to do it again. I also have this little clamp here, and I put a mark on the clamp so I can always put my feather in the same spot. And I also have a mark here on the little knob that turns the arrow so that I always start on the same spot. And it's just a matter of click, 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 and it goes to the 3 different positions. Basically, take your feather and just put it inside your jig. Line it up with the little line down at the bottom. Just slide it in. It's as simple as that. Okay, so that's just the way I want it. And now I'm going to take my double-sided tape, and I use 2 glues. There's the double-sided tape and also the platinum or Fletch tight. And you simply peel off your tape and run it along your feather. And every time I'm doing this, I'm always thinking, like, Wouldn't a caveman been happy if he had had some double-sided tape? Pretty convenient. So once I get the tape on there, we'll simply just take our scissors and snip it off. And now I can hook my nail into that little pink filament, and that will leave my glue on there, and I just simply peel it off. Now, to put the arrow on the shaft, basically it's lined up with that little mark, so I take my NOCK and put it on and simply apply the shaft into the jig. Now I've got the glue on my feather. I simply line it up. There's a little magnet here that will hold it in place, so I just line it up, just rotate it on, just press it into place. Okay, and that's how we get a feather on. Then I'll just run my thumb along it, just to seat it in. There. Now, I offset my feather by 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so that gives me that little spin. And I do that because I read Howard Hill's book, and he said that he offset his feathers by 1/8 of an inch, so why not? The next step would be simply to take the knob, rotate it one click, put my arrow back in. Now I use left wing feathers. The reason I use them is because I was reading in Byron Ferguson's book that he used them. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for Byron Ferguson, it's good enough for me. It's a little easier to do when you're not talking, but anyhow, we just press it in. Make sure that it's lined up. It's just visual. Okay, once again, take a little bit of tape, just for the feel for it with the thumb. And if I can't feel it that way, I turn it around, I go the other way. There we go. Sometimes the hardest part of all is finding that beginning. That's got to be it. There we go. Okay. So again, now I have wood arrows, and I've had aluminum, and I've tried bamboo a little bit. The carbon arrow I find to be the most practical. It may not be the most traditional, but we shouldn't go overboard when it comes to tradition and arrows, I don't think. These warriors, they stick it on there. But these warriors are a fairly reasonable priced arrow, and they work pretty good. So again, all we have to do, we've already turned it, we simply line it up, put it on, press it into place. press it down with our thumb, and here we have our 2 arrows. So we're going to do that one more time, but in the meantime we'll pause for a second and I'll be back in a minute. Okay guys, so I put on that third feather just to speed things up a little bit. So once we get the third feather on, we can take the arrow out of the jig. Now there's a big problem when you shoot off your hand, and that is that the front of this feather is extremely sharp and it can dig into you and cut you. So basically what I'll do is I'll just take a little bit of sandpaper and I'll sand down the point on that feather, the quill. Okay, I also use a glove, but a bit of rough sandpaper takes it down fairly quickly. Once you get it so that it will slide, you're laughing. Now at that point what I'll do, that's when I take my platinum and I'll put a little drop here. That covers up that sharp little point. And then I'll put a little drop there, and I don't do the whole quill because the glue may melt the double-sided glue. So I put a little bit on the ends, and then a little drop, little drop. It's kind of like welding, you know, you're just doing a little series of tacks to hold it down. The ends are already done. Okay, so when that's done, all I have to do is, well, that one wasn't done, do it around the end a little bit too. There we go. Okay, and that dries fairly quickly, and in about 20 minutes it will be ready to sand down a little bit and just check on the front again. Okay? Okay, so we'll be back in a little while. And here's another little point that I've got to put on. This stuff works really great. It's jet age plastic, or glue they call it. But it's much better than losing your points, I'll tell you that. But the whole thing again with this stuff is it's got to be quick. If you don't do it that quick, because I did it that once, you know, I only put it halfway in and wango tango, it never came out. Anyhow, there we are putting on another point. Okay, back in a minute. Okay guys, so after about 20 minutes the little bit of glue that we've put on there has hardened. And again I take a little bit of sandpaper and it's quite smooth now, and if you shot it, it would slide over the shelf and just smooth itself. But all I do is take a bit more sandpaper and just brush it a little bit, and that's getting real smooth now. As they say, as smooth as a baby's bum. Okay, so once you do that, you're going to have no problems. This is not going to cut you whatsoever. And if you wear a glove while you're laughing. But anyhow, now we've gone up to the stage of getting our feathers on and gluing them down. Okay, so we'll be back in a minute. Okay, now guys, I have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arrows here that I'm going to complete. First I'll just do one though, just so that you can see. So we lay it out, we take regular paint. This is a satin finish, but just regular white paint. And we simply just turn it. In doing that, we end up with a white arrow, and we'll make it a little fancier in a minute, but that's all we have to do. And there's nothing like a white arrow. They're easy to line up. You never lose them in the woods. They will certainly help you to aim, but the thing that you will not lose them in the woods, it's worth a lot, you know, rather than losing half a dozen arrows every year. So anyhow, that's all I do, and we'll be back in a minute. Okay guys, now we're going to finish off our arrow. So we've got our 6.5 inch points on there. Something that I like to do with my own arrows is I personalize them, and I have a little pattern that I put on my arrows, and it's magic, because as you know, Vikings like magic. This is just a little mark. I do it to all my arrows. I also mark my bows. It just personalizes them. And anyhow, this is a little pattern that I put on them. It's like a little V shape. Okay, and it's just something I like to do. So, white knock, white feathers, little pattern, white arrow, 200 grain points, brings them around. So this is my favorite arrow, and this is how I make them. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go out and shoot it. Anyhow, you guys take care and have fun. I'll talk to you later. Bye now.